Hey guys, welcome back to another Java tutorial. We are getting started with quiz 2 now. Um, so congrats if you've made it this far in the class, because I know for most of you it's probably been a struggle. It's been pretty much a learning curve, but um, I feel like if you get past quiz 1 and you kind of stick with it and you put in a decent amount of effort, some of the stuff that's done for quiz 2 is pretty it's very similar. It's just the only difference is now you're working with arrays. So now some of the syntax is going to change when you're trying to call back data yeah, so the syntax changes when you're trying to call back data, and some of the syntax changes for when you're trying to access certain things from your arrays. Um, and also, I feel like now you probably work with a little bit um, with quite a few more loops. Yeah, so just a couple more things that kind of elevate the difficulty of the code for quiz 2. But this not to get too deep into it, we'll just kind of start going into the actual quiz. So this is actually the quiz I took last semester with Knighton, um, and I don't have an answer key, but I'm using my own answer for the quiz as I guess the guide to show you guys how to code this out. Um, I made a few mistakes, but I corrected them, so it should all work once we're done. Um, so let's go ahead and get started. So this quiz is quiz 2, spring 2017 from Knighton V2. All right, so this is the used car purchases and the used car inventory class. And the interesting thing about this quiz is they actually give you two of the classes um, for the code, and you have to create the main class. So you're only creating one class in this quiz, but if you've kind of looked through it and you've read it, the main class is pretty intense. It's asking you to do quite a few things, and one thing I will say about this one is some of these things are kind of vague that they ask you to do. Um, Either that, or I mean, if like I said, if you've read through it, you see that in order to do one step, you have to already do another step. And I think this is like step 5 or 6 or something, where it's like step 5 is supposed to do what step 6 It's kind of weird. So, but we'll break that down. So basically what I did here is I just wrote out notes to what are the classes doing that they provided for you. And I think that's very key. That's what I did when I first got the quiz, is I just kind of took some notes on the side on my scratch piece of paper, and said, all right, what is public class used car inventory doing? What is used car purchases extends used car inventory? Just kind of wrote some notes. So we'll go ahead and start with used car inventory. So this is the parent class, and you should know that by seeing that the other class they provided you extends used car inventory. So used car purchases extends used car inventory. So this lets me know this is the parent class. So I kind of wrote that out. This is the parent class. I have one attribute, which is a string, and it's for car ID. So it has one attribute, which is a string. Then we have one constructor method. So one constructor which receives a string and sets it equal to the attribute. So this constructor is going to receive a string. We call it ID, or actually I call it ID. I don't want to use the this method, so I don't want to use car ID equals car ID here. I'll just do ID equals car ID. So I receive some ID here. I set it equal to this attribute. And then I have a regular public method that returns the attribute. Okay, so very straightforward stuff. And then I kind of just wrote some other stuff here. It says this class has methods that return the car ID. This class has the constructor that sets the car ID equal to my attribute. So I will have to use this class for things related to my car ID when using objects. So what this means, kind of the picture I get, the idea I get from this class is that this class is going to be used to do something with car ID because that's the only thing I'm working with. All right, and it's the parent class. So it's simple as that. I can get the car ID from this class. I set the car ID in this class, and I'm working with the car ID attribute. Okay, and I think the key thing here is to know that this class is what returns the car ID. Because if you've practiced enough and if you learn something from quiz 1, it's I think one of the things that quiz 1 tries to teach you is how do you get data from classes how do you get data back from classes, or how do you get data back from methods? How do you call that stuff back? So yeah, so I think that's one of the key takeaways from this class here, is that this class here returns the car ID. Now we move on to the child class, which is used car purchases. So this is the used car purchases class. It extends the used car inventory class, so that's how I know it's the child class. I have in one attribute. First attribute is a string, and it's for customer name. Second attribute is purchase amount, and it's a double. All right, so then I see that, and then I see a method called public void create used car purchases. I think is that what they call it? Yeah, create used car purchases. You receive a string, you're going to call that local variable customer name. You receive another string, you call that local variable purchase amount, another string ID. And so what you do with these local variables is you set customer name to customer name, purchase amount to purchase amount, and then you send that car ID to the used car inventory class up here. Okay? And I would say, I'm trying to see what note I would write to this. Oh, and I'm sorry, I missed that. You parse the purchase amount, because if you look at your arrays, so if you go to if you look at the arrays that they provided for you, string purchase amount equals 25150.00, all of that is in a string. It is not sent as a number. So here you receive it as a string, but here you want it as a double, so you have to parse it. All right, and so here for used car inventory ID, I'm just gonna say I'm passing the ID to the parent class. And so here at this step, it's going to recognize, okay, we need to go to a constructor called UsedCarInventory in the UsedCarInventory class, and we need to send it this ID, which is a string. And logically, I kind of just ask myself, is there a method in the UsedCarInventory class that receives a string? And you have it right here. Okay, so basically what's going on in this class is the child class is receiving all of the data. It's receiving everything, but this last piece here goes to the parent class. So then we move and we shift over here, and then we perform what it does. Okay, so that's let's see, I'm passing the ID to the parent class. I'll write another note at the end of all this right here. All right, so then we have another method, public string get customer name. So we have another return method. So this is a method that returns my customer name. And then we have another method that returns the purchase amount. So this is a method that returns my purchase amount. And then at the end of all of this, I will write this class returns customer name, purchase amount, and then I'll write this class receives all of the data for the arrays. My computer is slow. What happened to my mouse or my cursor? This class receives all the data for the arrays, and then I'll kind of add all this data goes to the create used car purchases method. In this method, ID is passed to the used car inventory constructor in the parent class. And yeah, that's kind of it for this class. Like, that's how I would walk away from this class, just understanding what's going on here. This class returns customer name and purchase amount. This class receives all the data for the arrays in the create used car purchases method. And in this method, we get that string ID and we send it to the constructor in the parent class, or the used car inventory constructor. All right. So those are kind of the mechanics of how this class is working. All right. So now I would say we can go ahead and get started with the main class. So you know, if go ahead, rewind this back, and you know, look at these two classes and watch me break them down as much as you need. But they're very straightforward. If you got past quiz 1, you should kind of know this. You should kind of know this stuff already. The difficult part is going to be coding this out in the main class. All right. So this is the arrays that they provided for us in the problem or in the quiz. So if we take a look at this, we see that string array customer is Gomez, Felicia, Steele, Brian, and Knighton, David. String array purchase amount, this number here, this number here, this number here. String array car ID, all this stuff here, all this stuff here, and then all this stuff here. And I'm gonna add a note. This is what you call parallel arrays. And what I mean by that is that you have multiple arrays with different types of data, and the location for each of the arrays line up so that it all belongs to one object. Now that might sound a little bit confusing, but what I'm saying is Gomez Felicia represents element 0 in the customer array. So element 0 for purchase amount will correspond to Gomez Felicia, and element 0 for car ID will correspond to Gomez Felicia. So element 0, element 0, element 0, all of those will line up in a way where you send all that specific data to one object, so that one object holds all the data for element 0 from each of these arrays. Okay, and that's the big idea for quiz 2, is learning how to work with parallel arrays, or just learning how to work with arrays in general, because like I said, you will be trying to get each of these elements to line up or to correspond to a certain object, but in order for it to correspond to that certain object, you're going to be calling back, you're going to be putting in that data according to the location of each array element. So like I said, element 0, element 0, element 0 will be for object 1. Element 1, element 1, element 1 will be for object 2. Element 2, element 2, element 2 will be for object 3. So I know that sounds kind of confusing, but we'll just get into it. All right. So the first step here, which the steps start at step 3, because 1 and 2 are just telling you, hey, this is the stuff we're giving you, whatever. So step 3 says create an array of objects of type used. Always misspelling. All right. Create an array of objects of type used car purchases for the number of items in parallel arrays. So they want you to create objects according to a class with the number of arrays that you need. So, with the number of objects that you need. So you will need 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. So you'll need 3 objects for these arrays. So because technically the array has 0, 1, 2 elements, but that's really 1, 2, 3, and you're going to need to have an object for each of these elements. So you would code this out for, they want it for the used car purchases class. So used car purchases, we're going to call it ARR, new used car purchases, and I'm going to need 3 objects, 3 array objects. Create an array of objects. So this is basically saying this piece of code, this is what this piece of code is saying. I am creating an array called ARR for the used car purchases class. This array contains 3 objects. All right. So that's how I would interpret this piece of code. They want you to create an array for this class, and they want they want the number of objects that you'll need for each of these elements of the array. Okay, so that's what this class, that is what this piece of code does right here. If you want to create an array for a class, you have to use the class and the square brackets to indicate, okay, I am about to create an array for this class. Name your array whatever you want, use your new keyword, and then you say the class name again, the square brackets, but in here you're going to put the amount of objects that you're going to need. And in this case, we need 3. Okay? So yeah, that's that piece of code there. So we take care of number 3. Number 4, create a loop to instantiate the objects. This loop calls a method that cleans up garbage characters. This loop calls a method in used car purchases class to instantiate the data in the arrays. So I'm even going to read back through that. Create a loop to instantiate the objects. This loop calls a method. Excuse me, guys. This loop calls a method that cleans up garbage characters. This loop calls a method in used car purchases class to instantiate the data in the arrays. All right. So we're going to have to use a for loop, because for loops allow us to control things a little bit better, and it just makes more sense to do a for loop to loop through the proper amount of objects that you have here. So but one thing that you'll notice for these quiz twos is you're going to be using a lot of for loops, do while loops, or you know, do while loops, for loops. I know there's probably a different type of loop I'm forgetting, but what you're gonna have to do the for loop. You're gonna use this a lot because the thing about the for loop that is very useful in quiz 2 type of stuff is that it allows you to control how long you loop, in a way where you can use variables or certain, yeah, you can use variables, or in this case my array, to tell my loop how many times to loop. So here I'm telling the loop, all right, I want to start at 0. I'm gonna, x is my loop control variable. I want to loop for the length of my array, and that's it, because that's how many objects I need to instantiate. We created 3 objects. Those 3 objects belong to the ARR array. They belong to that. They belong to the ARR, and so then what this loop is saying is I'm gonna loop for the length of ARR, and the loop and the length is 3. So I'm gonna loop for 0, 1, and 2. All right. So that is why I'm using the for loop here. And so now we want to call a method that cleans up the garbage characters, but first we need to instantiate the objects. So in order to instantiate the objects, here all we did was create an array that is holding three that is holding three that has 3 placeholders for something, right? So really wish I had a tool to visualize this stuff for you guys. So I'm trying to think how to explain this. ARR is an array that is holding 3 things. It has a space for 3 things to go in there. Okay, but it doesn't know exactly what 3 things go in there yet. All we know is that this array belongs to the used car purchases class. That's it. But if I want to put things inside of those placeholders that are in the ARR array, I have to tell it for ARR element X, because I'm going to loop, because I'm in a loop. So right now, let's say I'm going through the first part of the loop. So right now, okay, I'm looping for the first time. X represents 0. So for element 0 in ARR, create the new object for used car purchases. This is how I'm instantiating it. So, because now, this is how it's going to be for the first loop. It's going to say for ARR0, create the object in this element. So just remember that you're looping here, and that X will represent those elements in the ARR array. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write a note and say ARR X represents the element new ARRX represents the element new used car purchases is creating the object is creating slash instantiating. Is that right? Yeah. New used car purchases is creating slash instantiating the object for that corresponding element. So for element 0, the first time I loop, I'm going to say create a new object for element 0. Then I'm going to loop again for element 1 and ARR, create another object in this location. For ARR2, create another object in this location. That is what this piece of code is doing there. So we've instantiated the objects. Then it says this loop calls a method that cleans up garbage characters. Okay. So we haven't created a method that cleans up garbage characters. So if you've watched some of my quiz 1 stuff, I tell you that this is the part where you have to be somewhat of a responsible coder. You have to remember things like this, because right now you're going in chronological order working through this quiz, but you haven't created the method that they're telling you to call. So I would just say, all right, the thing I need to clean up is this this thing here. If you read through the quiz, I'm not gonna read through the quiz, but if you read through the quiz, it tells you that this stuff here is a bunch of garbage. The only thing you want to keep is letters, digits, spaces, and dashes. And so you see that parentheses, the ampersand or whatever, the exclamation, the hashtag, the carets, percent sign, money signs, whatever, all that stuff, you don't want it. You don't want it. So you have to create, it tells you to create a method in the quiz. It tells you to create a method that takes all that stuff out. So we haven't created that method, but we know that we have to create it for car ID. Car ID is the thing that's holding all the stuff you want to clean up. So what you're going to do is you're going to say, I want to clean up all those things inside car ID. So car ID element X equals cleanup car ID element X. So you can see there it's giving me a red line for cleanup. It's because we haven't created it yet. But I have to remember as I go through my code that I have to remember to create this method called cleanup. There's two ways you could do this. You could code it out here and then actually go and write it. So I could, where am I at? I could go, okay, I called the method there. I need, pretty sure I'd have to return a string. And I'm going to call it cleanup. And I got to receive the array. How would I receive that array? I think you would call it like string bad data. Yeah. And so now you'll see and for some reason it's still showing up red. I'm not sure why. But did I change cleanup? Oh. Boom. All right. So that's one way you could do it, is you get to this step. You get to this step and it's telling you to call this method that you haven't created yet, and you say, all right, well, I need to send this stuff here in car ID X. It could be 0, 1, 2, or 3. When you're in your loop, you're going to go car ID 0 is equal to me sending car ID 0 to this method called cleanup. And when you get to that piece of the code there, when you run it or whatever, when you compile it, it's going to go, okay, I got to the step here. Let me go to this method. Let's receive that data from car ID. But you have to remember that car ID 0 represents a string, car ID 1 represents a string, and car ID 2 represents a string. So whenever you pass this element to cleanup, you don't receive it as car ID X. That's wrong. You receive it according to the data that's being held in car ID 0, 1, or 2, and what's being held in there is a string. So, and I'm just gonna call it bad data. Um, yeah. If car ID 0 held an integer, then here you would receive it as an integer, and so on and so forth. Whatever is inside of that element, whether it be a string, integer, double, float, whatever, you have to receive it as that to whatever the method is that you're sending it to. Okay, so that's one way to go about it. I honestly think that's the best way to go about it, is to get to these places here and you're like, okay, they're telling me to call something I haven't created yet. Let me write the piece of code out to call it, but then let me actually go create it. All right. And honestly, I'm going to kind of do that right now, just because I've gone this far. But if you decided to do it the other way, where you're like, okay, I'll just, I'll continue, and I'll just remember to go create that method, and I'll have to remember to call it cleanup. But this is how I went about it when I did my quizzes. I went and actually coded it out. So public static string cleanup. Car ID represents a string, so I need to receive a string. I'm gonna call it bad data, and let's actually read through how they want you to create this method. That was number okay, so this is number 6. This is part 6, I think. Oh, no. 5. Create a method to clean up garbage. Okay, so this is number 7. Create a new method in Quiz 2A 2017 Spring to clean up the garbage characters shown above for the car ID. This method will need to return a string variable with all garbage characters removed while leaving the spacing and the dash intact. So I'm going to write some notes here. It says create a new method, clean up garbage characters shown above for the car ID. This method is for the car ID. This method will need to return a string variable. This method will return a string. It will return a string with all garbage characters removed while leaving the spacing and the dash intact. And now that I think about it, I wrote it up here. This method will clean up garbage characters. This method will return a string variable. This string will only contain spaces and dashes along with letters and digits. Okay, so refer to number 7, but whatever. I'll just copy it. All right. So this is what the cleanup method has to do. All these things here. So the first thing I did, and this is where I got stuck. This is where I completely got stuck when I took the quiz. Is I didn't know how the heck I would have to take out all these things in this string. But one thing I noticed while doing the quizzes is that you can use loops to do that. So I knew I was going to need a loop in there. And one thing I knew for sure was I was going to need an if statement, because I needed to loop through this string. I needed to loop through each of these characters and tell it, okay, as you're looping, if you find a letter, if you find a number, if you find a space, if you find a dash, keep it. And that's literally how I wrote it out in my quiz. I'm trying to find it. Yeah, I said I want to keep letters, spaces, dashes, and numbers. And then I started writing a literal sentence for my if statement. If the string in my array has a dash, if the string in my array has a space, if the string in my array has a letter, if the string in my array has a number. Let's keep those things. And then once I broke it down like that, I was like, okay, now it's starting to make sense how I'm supposed to do this. The first step is that you have to notice you're going to be extracting things from this string, and you're going to have to put those things, because it's not like I'm sure there is a method in Java where it's like delete this, and whatever, keep it in the same string. But what they're asking you to do here, and not only that, but they haven't taught us that, they never did, is you're going to be pulling things away from this string. But as you're pulling them away from the string, you're going to have to put those things that you're pulling into a new string. So the first thing I did was I created clean string clean data, and set it equal to an empty string, because the things that I'm going to be taking away, because I'm going to want 2, but I need to put 2 I'm going to want to keep 2, so then I have to put it into an empty string. I'm going to want to keep 0, 1, and 5, and as I'm looping, I'm going to tell it, all right, put it into the clean data string because it's empty, and that's where I want to keep all the good stuff. So that was my first step. And then I actually went ahead and created my loop, and then for my loop, I did bad data as my loop control variable, because whenever I receive the string, so I'm going to receive car ID 0, so I'm going to receive it as bad data here. Car ID 0 will represent bad data, and when I loop, I want to loop through the length of this string for element 0. And so that's why I'm setting my loop, that's why I'm limiting my loop to the length of my variable bad data, because whether I receive element 0, 1, or 2, when I receive it, it's going to loop for the length of element 0, it's going to loop for the length of element 1, and then it's going to loop for the length of element 2. And I'm sure all of these are different lengths. So that's why I'm setting my my limit to the length of bad data. All right. So now is the interesting part, because the if statement was the difficult part. But hopefully you guys are comfortable enough with if statements at this point, or somewhat comfortable, and we'll just kind of write it out like this. I want spaces. I want dashes. I want letters. I want numbers. That's all you want. They explicitly tell you everything you're supposed to keep. So there is no point in looking at all these strings and being like, okay, I need to eliminate percentages. I need to eliminate, up arrows, carets, whatever the heck you call those. I need to eliminate exclamations. I need to eliminate number signs. Like that's kind of how I was approaching it when I was first taking it, and I was just confusing myself because I was like, how am I supposed to do all this? But then I thought about it a little bit more, and I was like, I'm not supposed to do all this. I'm just supposed to take what they want because they're telling me what they want. So if these are the only things I want, now my if statement just became easier, because then I can say if bad data dot car at x equals a dash, or if bad data car at X equals a space, or if bad data car at X equals oh well, sorry, this last one, what did I do here? Equal bad data car at X equals a space. Oh, equals a space. Then so I take care of my dashes, I take care of my space. What the heck? Why is it doing that? Whatever. So I have my dashes, I have my spaces, and now I just want letters and numbers. And there's a method that lets you just get letters and numbers from a string, and the method goes like this. It's character dot is letter, and we will do bad data dot car at X. All right, so let me break this down. What I'm saying to this if statement, and let me actually finish it out, maybe it'll make a little more sense. Yeah, this quiz is pretty difficult. Not gonna lie, I'm having trouble explaining it because it is not very it's very abstract, and there's many ways to do this, and you know there's many ways to do it, and so explaining the logic can be a little bit difficult just because like I said, there's so many ways to do it, so I'm basically just explaining the way I went on about it. So remember that we are looping through the length of the string here. Okay? So this X, when it's 0, it's at the 0 string. So let's take an example here. Let's break down an example. Let's say that I receive element 0 for car ID. So then that means here I am receiving this guy. All right. So at my loop, I'm receiving this guy. This guy is represented by bad data. So in this loop, I'm saying I am going to loop for the length of this string that starts with 2015. So when I'm at 0, 0 corresponds to the 2, and then when I loop again, 1 will correspond to 0. When I loop again, 2 will correspond to 1, and hopefully you see the pattern there, is that this X is going to be looping throughout. It's going to, it's going to loop through the whole length of the string, and X will represent the position of the string. Okay, so when I'm at 0, it's going to say, all right, I'm at 0, so let's go to the character at 0 for bad data. Does it equal a dash? Does 2 equal a dash? No. Okay, that's fine. This is false. But you have the or here, so it's okay if this is false. It's all right if that's false. Then it's going to say, does the car at 0 in bad data, we're still looking at the 2, does it equal a space? Does 2 equal a space? No, that's false. All right, that's fine. We got another or. So it's going to say, for the character, we're going to pull a method that is part of this method here is part of the character class. So we're looking for a letter or digit. And this is how you implement that method. And then you do for the character at 0 in bad data, so we're still looking at 2, is it a letter or a digit? And then you look at it and you're like, yeah, it's a letter. I'm sorry, it's a digit, it's a 2. So then that makes it true. So this makes it true, which makes my if statement execute this next command. And what we're going to say is, to my empty string, clean data. So now clean data holds the 2. So now clean data equals 2. So for character at 0, for bad data, add this character to my empty string and set it equal to the clean data variable. So now clean data equals 2. So now let's go ahead and loop through this again. So now we're at 1. And so now we're looking at 0. We're at position 1 in the bad data string. So now we're looking at 0. And then we go, is the car at 1 for the bad data string equal to a dash? No, 0 is not equal to a dash. Is character at 1 for bad data equal to a space? 0 is not equal to a space. Is character at 1 for bad data equal to a letter or digit? It is. So it's going to be the same situation. For car at 1, in this string, add that character to this empty string, which now contains 2, so it's not necessarily empty, but now you're just going to add the 0 in there, because the 0 passed the if statement. We found this if statement is true, so for the character at where this statement became true, add that character to my empty string. So now, hopefully you get the idea there, but let's get to a case where it doesn't find anything that fits that if statement. So let's say when we get here to the parentheses, right? So whatever position that is, let's say it's like, okay, so that's 4, 5, 6. It's position 6. So for car at 6, for bad data, does it equal a dash? No. For car at 6 in bad data, does it equal a space? No. Parentheses is not equal to a space. For car at 6 in bad data, is it a letter or a digit? Parentheses is not a digit. So we're not going to perform this statement here. So the if statement just becomes false, and then we just loop again. And so then you see that for these 3 parentheses, we're always going to get false. So we're never going to execute this. Never. We're never going to execute that. And then we're going to get to these and signs. An and sign is not a space. It's not a dash. It's not a space. It's not a letter or a digit. So we will never execute this. Okay? Notice that there's a space here. So the space there passed the test. So, I get to 215. The space passed the test. The space gets added to the string. And so then now we get to BMW. And now BMW is a letter or digit, so BMW will pass the test. Then we have an exclamation point, number sign. Those things will not pass the test, so they won't get added. And then we have 638752, which will pass the test. I think there's supposed to be a space in there. Yeah, there's supposed to be a space in there. I remember that whenever we took the quiz, he told us certain things weren't supposed to be there, and it was supposed to be a space. So actually, that's supposed to be a space. So then that's supposed to be a space, which will pass the test, and then number sign and number sign won't. And so then 638752 will 638752 will pass the test whenever you start looping through those characters. And so then by the end of all this looping, by the time you're done looping through the whole string, this is what your empty string will now become. It'll become 2015 BMW 638752. And that's the idea. That's the idea behind this cleanup method, is that you receive, this string. You will loop for the length of the string bad data, and as you're looping through it, this loop control variable will correspond to the character that you are checking at that moment while you're looping through the string. So you're gonna loop through, and we'll say this is car ID 0 is you'll end up looping, and then the clean data will equal that car ID 1, and then clean data will equal, let's look at it. So we won't keep this first two things, but we will keep the dashes. So we'll keep the dashes, and we'll do 20. Oh, I'm sorry. These are not supposed to be dashes. They're supposed to be another symbol, but I don't have it on my keys, so we'll just go ahead and we'll just go ahead and stick with those little caret signs or whatever. So then you'll loop through that, and then 2014, those numbers stay, the space stays, Ford, the dash stays, it's supposed to be all caps, the dash stays, F150 stays, the space stays, and then 2530 stays. And that passes all that. And then for car ID 2, let's look at it. So 2010 will pass, the space will pass, Chevy will pass, Cruise will pass, and then 4875 will pass. Oh, actually 84875. There's an 8 right there. And so that's the idea of how you're going to clean up that data. You're going to loop through all the stuff, and then where you find the things that don't meet that if statement, it won't add it to your string, because here you are adding the character that passes the if statement to the empty string. As you keep adding things to the empty string, you will end up with all the characters that meet that pass the if statement. Notice all the characters that pass the if statement are on your printout screen. All right, so that is the breakdown of this method, and then at the end of it you return clean data. So you'll return it. What is the deal here? Why is this returning red? Return clean data. Boom. I was returning it in the wrong spot. Yeah. So that was the breakdown for the cleanup method. And so here you will send a string to cleanup, then performs, well, cleanup then removes, all the unwanted symbols then clean up then returns the the symbols that you want and sets it equal to your element in the car ID array. Because if you notice, when you're at car ID 0, you will send it to the cleanup method and you will send that corresponding array, or I'm sorry, that corresponding element that excuse me guys, excuse me. That corresponding element will get cleaned up. It'll get cleaned up and then it'll get sent back, you know, because you're gonna send it, okay, receive it, clean it up, return it, and then cleanup will actually return it and set it equal back to the element. So when you send the dirty version or the bad version of element 0, it goes and cleans it up. It returns the good version of element 0 and sets it back to here, to element 0. But really, you're returning the string and setting it back to element 0. So at the end of all this, you're going to send something, you're going to receive something back, and that something you receive back will be set equal to car ID 0. All right. So then this loop calls a method. So that was this step. And now this loop calls a method in UsedCarPurchases class to instantiate the data in the arrays. So UsedCarPurchases. This loop calls a method in UsedCarPurchases to instantiate the data in the arrays. So what method did we discuss in the UsedCarPurchases class that was setting the data equal to attributes in this class? And if you remember at the beginning, I said that this class, this create UsedCarPurchases, is taking all the data from the arrays and setting it equal to attributes. I think I mentioned that here. This class receives all the data for the arrays. All this data goes to the create UsedCarPurchases method. And this method, the ID is passed, blah, blah, blah. So basically what it's telling you, it's saying call this create UsedCarPurchases method because this method is what's setting all the data from these arrays equal to their attributes or whatever. So I keep yawning and I'm annoying myself. I'm so sorry, guys. It's not even late. It's 2:30 in the afternoon and I'm already like ready for a nap. So in order to send that, in order to do this, we will use the following piece of code. All right. So what I did here is I said for element X in RR, call create used car purchases, pass customer element perch amount element and car ID element. And we're looping here, right? We're still looping here. So let's break down this loop again. We're in the first part, we're looping the first time. For array 0, please create a new object. Okay? For array 0, create a new object for array 0. For car ID 0, clean this thing up, bring it back, and set it back to car ID 0. So car ID 0 now equals this good stuff here. Okay? For array 0, call the method create UsedCarPurchases and pass it all of these elements in these arrays so that you can set what I'm passing you equal to attributes. Because array 0 is an object. Uh-oh. So array 0, array 1, array 2, these are objects. These placeholders are holding actual objects for the UsedCarPurchases class. So what I'm saying is, here is for the array 0 object, call this method and pass it these elements in these arrays so that when this is executed, you are setting the things I just passed you equal to some attributes that correspond to the array 0 object. So let me go through that again. For the array 0 object, or array 1 object, or array 2 object, because it's a loop, so it's going to do it for everything. For those objects, call the method that allows me to pass the proper data to this class, and this class goes ahead and sets those things I'm sending you equal to attributes. So now once I do that, object 0 for ARR for that array now has the proper data equal to its attributes. All right, that's all that piece of code is doing there. Array X is an object. For element for these elements in these arrays, pass them to UsedCarPurchases and set them equal to something. Now my object for ARR has its attributes, and that's what's going on there in this piece of code here. Okay, so number 4 is done. Number 5, call the method in step 6 using the array as a pointer. Basically send the array to that method. Step, what was that, number 5? Number 5. All right. So call the method in step 6. So step 6, this is a display method that gives the black box output. This method accepts an array of UsedCarPurchases as a parameter. It creates a loop that extracts the data from the objects, generates a print line, keeps a running total of cells as they are processed, and displays a total line. So this step 6 will probably take me some time to explain, probably hopefully not as much as the string cleanup, as the cleanup method. But I will end this video here and then just make another one for the remaining part of the quiz. So check out part 2, just so that I don't keep this video too long.